Hello and welcome to Intermission 2, The Key, Part 2. Oh, the things I would change if gifted with the power of foresight. The sheer amount of preservable, unbroken humanity. To think of it fills me with emotion in the current day. Of that swirling hellstorm, unbridled rage shines through the most. A powerful eye staring through a violent hurricane, which rips and tears as it travels, caring not about the destination. We ended up at sea, after coming to a collective decision for MacCallum to reach out psychically. He pinpointed the artifact to a location in the middle of the ocean through the use of a globe and his own version of foresight. Witnessing his power while calculating relative coordinates was nerve-wrackingly fascinating, as I'd never seen something quite like it. His eyes would fade to white, his fingers twitching violently over the key, his mouth hung limply agape, and he let out unintelligible guttural dialogue. With coordinates acquired, we'd set out to sea, accompanied by an old, withered captain. An asset gained through my father, who once set out on a similar expedition with no direction, and thus no luck. Upon witnessing my accomplice's strange condition while psychically tracking the artifact, the captain of our boat seemed exceptionally nervous. MacCallum constantly gave new directions and orders to the captain. At many points of our expedition, I could not find myself comforted by the assuredness that we hadn't gone in circles. We'd been at sea for days, probably weeks, perhaps even months. For one such as myself, it was indeterminable, and at the same time not the focus of my thoughts. In fact, during that time it was nothing more than a wavering ember. The sea was admittedly unkind, and the nights stung with an unnaturally sharp coldness. That coldness did not waver much through the hours of daylight. Additionally, the closer we got to the artifact, the more daylight itself wavered, becoming undetectable through thick clouds and harsh rain. One morning, after waking with a particularly strange sense of dread, I found our captain deceased, old clinging skin frozen to bones, one gangrenous hand stuck firmly around the ship's throttle. His once bright green eyes had faded to the blue of the sky and were permanently fixed open. After removing him from his uncomfortable position, MacCallum assumed the duty of steering. He'd assured me we were close to our long-sought-out destination. 4 excruciating nights passed, each colder and harder to sleep through than the last. On the 3rd, snow had begun to gently fall from those heavy clouds, and on the 4th it fell in thick sheets. We finally obtained resolve, witnessing a large island in the distance. It was hard to say if we had traveled further than our original coordinates, or if we had not gone far enough. Either way, they would have been wrong. I fear, looking back, that this place is unreachable to us, only graspable from those like MacCallum. Seeing that island reignited my profound hope, my driving force to solve a mystery. We docked the boat offshore and headed inland. The island was coated in a dense pine forest. Once enveloped by it, one found themselves in the midst of the dark looming pines. The light of the sky had shone through the gaps of branches and needles. Where that light came through, so too did the snow. It created glowing pillars that cut through the other forest scenery. There was an unexplainable sense of holiness to this place, fully untouched by human influence. For hours we traversed through, constantly turning and twisting on our path. MacCallum walked ahead of me, a machete in his hand to cut away the wood where it became necessary. His other hand firmly held the key. I feared the thought of him freezing to death, for I did not know if I would be able to reobtain the key from his chilling grasp. When my hands had lost feeling, replaced by a restrictive numbness that I felt reflected in my toes, that's when MacCallum alerted me that the link became stronger between him and the theoretical door. As we entered a large cave which sat on the side of a looming mountain, he picked up his pace. Likewise, I followed, us both rushing further in. In the center of this cave, we found an altar. MacCallum warned me to stand back, while putting his free hand onto the stone of the center structure, fingers beginning to twitch over it. "The receptacle," he muttered quietly. He gave a final self-reassuring squeeze to the key in his palm before his hand glided up and hovered over the keyhole. Slowly, his hand cut through the air to fall. The keyhole began to radiate purple light. As the key entered, the ground began to shift, dust dissipating to reveal carvings in a large circle around the altar. Designs in these carvings began to glow, becoming reflected in the cave's ceiling. After fully inserting the key, MacCallum began twisting it. I felt the circular platform detach from the earth, beginning to levitate. Glancing to the cave entrance, I noticed that same painfully incandescent shade of purple. In the perfect pattern to fit the platform, the ceiling of the cave began to disintegrate. Replacing it was an intense light which soon became too much for my eyes to bear. Snow no longer fell onto my skin. Forcing sight through the thin split in my eyelids revealed that MacCallum was no longer on the platform. He'd been absorbed by the light. I remember waking soon after, amongst the rubble of the fallen platform, purple light present only in the sky. MacCallum appeared in a flash of pure light. He slowly faded into existence, his sharp facial features exceptionally changed, seemingly molded. His skin was a brighter white, a kind that glowed and seemed almost transparent. He told me he no longer went by the name MacCallum, after being in what he'd call the other place. He went by a fraction of his first name, having shortened it to 3 letters. His face seemed maybe 10 years older, though he told me he'd been gone for hundreds. He'd gone to a place where the Garden of Eden still contained 2 fruits, both ripe for the picking. A thinly veiled analogy to tell me he was no longer affected by the bonds of mortality, no longer bound by the same promise as we all are. That just as it was given to us, mortality will eventually and unpredictably end. As the wind picked itself back up and the snow began to fall, I found myself powerfully compelled to do something irrational. I reached into my bag, pulling out a loaded pistol. The wind swirled around me in dramatic encouragement, and I fired 5 rounds into MacCallum. Blood poured down his body, soaking his clothes, yet his expression was completely unbothered. His face dropped further, reflecting the temperature. "You couldn't have handled its gifts," he told me as he took a step forward. He disarmed the pistol and hit me with enough force to knock me out cold. When I woke, I found myself surrounded in smoke, embers flying through the air. My eyes scanned my surroundings. I found myself lying on the lawn of my burning home, the fire far too large to be put out. I know not why he took such a peculiar thing from me, nor where he had gone. In opening the door and traveling to wherever he traveled to, he'd ripped from me what I'd sought out in the first place.